Hello and welcome to our ninth lesson looking at trends in marriage. This is a continuation of the GCSE Sociology unit looking at families. So just so you are aware that the powers that be have made the request that teachers not show their image on the internet that has public access. So as a result, they have asked that I use an avatar instead, which is why you'll see a little animated version of myself on the bottom right. So let's get into the lesson. So the do now task is I want you to think about what the point of marriage is today. What exactly in the 21st century contemporary British society, what exactly is the point of going through all the ceremony, all the traditions to bind yourself to another person in a legal and / depending on your view, religious viewpoint? Then I want you to further consider, why do you think marriage makes it difficult for people to go their own separate ways? What exactly is accomplished by locking people into something that then is very, very difficult to get out of? And I have a video I want to share with you which looks at this very question.
It's tempting to think of marriage as old-fashioned. Why not just live with someone and be done with it? What need for a public ceremony? Why the weird traditions, all those churches, temples, hymns, vows, and prayers? Marriage must be a silly relic from the religious childhood of humankind, not designed for the more logical modern world. And yet, it survives. The essence of marriage is to tie our hands, to frustrate our wills, to put high and costly obstacles in the way of splitting up. Why do we?
Yeah, exactly. So why would people go through such a thing? And before we go through the video, I really want you to take this time perhaps to even ask somebody if you have them there. So to really take the time to sort of think over these questions, maybe have a look at a bit of a book, do some reading around this. If you need to do a quick little research, what exactly happens with marriage. So I want you to think carefully about this before we move on.
Originally, we told ourselves that God wanted us to stay married. But even now, when God is not invoked, we keep making sure that marriage is rather hard to undo. For one thing, you carefully invite everyone you know to watch you say you'll stick together. You willingly create a huge layer of embarrassment were you ever to turn around and admit it might have been a mistake. Furthermore, even though you could keep things separate, marriage tends to mean deep economic and legal entanglements. You know it's going to take the work of a phalanx of accountants and lawyers to prise you apart. It could be done, but it will be ruinous. It's as if we somewhere recognize that there might, rather strangely, be some quite good, though uncomfortable reasons why making it difficult to split up a union can be an advantage for its members.
So thinking about divorce itself, it probably didn't stress enough the costly side of things when people get divorced, because when you get divorced, typically speaking, there are lawyers, and when you have lawyers, that is going to cost tens of thousands of pounds. So people think that when they divorce that they will split things 50-50. That doesn't happen, because a large percentage of what you split will actually end up going to the courts, to the accountants and the lawyers. And not only that, is that there's also other things which you need to go through, such as counseling, or you may need to go through some sort of mediation process, hopefully, which can be resolved before you go to the courts. But this can involve huge amounts of stress as well. So the emotional and financial energy that goes into divorcing makes just the prospect so something which you don't really want to take on. And so it's sort of making the point of why then would there be, what's the advantage behind this? And I'm going to let him speak a bit more.
The marshmallow test was a celebrated experiment in the history of psychology, designed to measure children's ability to delay gratification and track the consequences of being able to think long-term. Some 3-year-old children were offered a marshmallow, but told they would get 2 if they held off from eating the first one for 5 minutes. It turned out a lot of children just couldn't make it through this period. It was too tempting. The less immediate benefit of gobbling the marshmallow in front of them was stronger than the strategy of waiting. Crucially, it was observed that these children went on to have lives blighted by a lack of impulse control and fared much worse than the children who were best at subordinating immediate fun for long-term benefit.
What he's saying here is that children who grow up without the impulse control will then later on in life struggle with the same thing, not being able to hold off getting things straight away, and that lands them into a lot of trouble later in life.
Relationships are perhaps no different. Here too, many things feel very urgent. We're angry and want to get out. We're excited by a new person and need to abandon our present partner at once. And yet, as we look around for the exit, every way seems blocked. It would cost a fortune. It would be embarrassing. It would take an age. This isn't a coincidence. Marriage is a giant inhibitor of impulse, set up by our conscience to keep our libidinous, ungrateful, wild, desiring selves in check. What we're essentially buying into by submitting to its dictates is the insight that we are, as individuals, likely to make very poor choices under the sway of strong short-term impulses. To marry is to recognize that we require structure to insulate us from our urges. It's to lock ourselves up willingly because we don't trust ourselves. It's a very unusual marriage indeed, in which the two people don't spend a notable amount of time fantasizing that they weren't in fact married. But the point of marriage is to make these feelings not matter very much. It's an arrangement that protects us from what we desire, and yet know, in our more reasonable moments, we don't truly need or even perhaps want. At their best, relationships involve us in attempts to develop, mature, and become whole. We often get drawn to people precisely because they promise to edge us in the right directions. But it's too easy to seem kind and normal when we keep going out with someone new. The truth about us, on the basis of which self-improvement begins, only becomes clear over time. Chances of development increase hugely when we don't keep running away to people who will falsely reassure us there's nothing too wrong with us. Over time, the argument for marriage has shifted. It's no longer about external forces having power over us. What we are correctly now focused on is the psychological point of making it hard to throw it all in. For the last 50 years, the burden of intelligent effort has been on attempting to make separation easier. The challenge now lies in another direction, in trying to remind ourselves why immediate flight doesn't always make sense, in trying to see the point of holding out for the second marshmallow.
Fantastic. So as you can see, if we tie that marshmallow experiment, the analogy that is used, you can see then how marriage is used as a form of delaying the rush of trying to split up. It's to allow people to reconsider and to take more time, because the reward is far greater if the relationship will continue to flourish than if you were to go down the route of expensive lawyers, etc., etc. So let's push on from here. Okay, so our learning objective, what are we trying to get out of our lesson today? So I have a good question. So is marriage no longer important in the UK today? And this is the question I have for you. We will be going over a few things. So we want to make sure that we discuss these things with a degree of sensitivity. As you can see, we are already talking about things which are somewhat sensitive, particularly divorce. We're going to look at some of these trends. We did look at them a couple lessons ago, and we're going to revisit the same statistics, and then there will be some homework reading which I will get you to do. Now, I want to identify some of these trends in data. So if you go to, I think it's page 46 of your family's booklet, you will see some of the data that we're about to analyze. Here we go. So what does this chart tell us about patterns of marriage in the UK? So this is looking at the number of marriages are from 1934 to 2014 in England and Wales. And as we kind of go along, we can see there's a relatively consistent thing going on here. There was a bit of a leap. So there was, obviously, you can see that was happening between 1939 or maybe a little bit earlier to 1944. And we know what event was going on, World War II, which would have probably had something to do with the decline. Then as life returned to normal, it sort of keeps this sort of line here that's going on. Then from the early 70s or the from about 1970 onwards, we see then a gradual decline down. So this is a number of marriages that are going on in the UK. So this is telling us that marriage is declining over time. Then, if we continue on, let's look at some marriages for men and women. So marriage rates for men and marriage rates for women are roughly the same, and you can see because women go down as well. So the marriage rate, you can see the percentage here is going down. So the percentage of men and women getting married is becoming much lower. Then, here we go, we continue across to the numbers of marriage of same-sex couples. So this is looking at male civil partnerships and female civil partnerships being that which is recognized by the state. Male marriages and female marriage, as marriage equality was not passed until a little bit later. You won't find it on this graph. But looking at the number of civil partnerships, you can see as soon as it was passed in 2006, you can see the number starts off relatively high and then it drops quite dramatically to the point where now it looks like it will be less than 1,000 marriages happening, or sorry, these civil partnerships happening in the UK. Then, next graph, we can see that the average age of men and women from 74 to 2014, are increasing. Okay, so people are marrying at a much, much older age than they were 30, 40 years ago. You can see for females in particular, the average age looks to be about 26. And for guys, about 28, 29, whereas now for guys, it is about 37, and for women, it's getting close to 35. So people are getting married in their 30s, whereas previously, people were getting married in their mid-late 20s. Okay, so I've got a little bit of a comic strip, so relation sinking ship. So this person is pondering this idea. Why is it necessary to go through the woe of breaking up, then the insecurity of starting something new? Why can't I just skip from honeymoon period to honeymoon period? Well, that's the downside of serial monogamy. Now, I prefer my way, sugar serial monogamy. Monogamy means sort of relationship with one person. So here we go. This cartoon is making a joke about serial monogamy. And what does serial monogamy mean? Now you think of a killer and a serial killer. I'm sure then if you have monogamy and serial monogamy, you could put 2 and 2 together. So I don't want you to worry too much about this in detail, but we're going to look at someone who's going to talk about this quite extensively. Now his name is Paul Joseph Watson, and Paul Joseph Watson is a popular YouTuber and a journalist who identifies as part of the New Right. So if you remember from your sociological studies looking at different sociological viewpoints, the New Right is sort of a new traditional viewpoint, so to speak. So he is making the argument that the idea of falling in love is a mental illness because it causes people to act irrationally. People are obsessed with this honeymoon phase, like our person was in the picture. They're sort of obsessed with this idea of sort of quickly falling in love and swooning, so to speak. So they're very quick from that, not really thinking about it. So then they're quick not to actually sit down and really think about it. These people are they want that emotion that comes from the swooning point. So Let's then see what else what else he was thinking. He argues that apps like Tinder, for example, have caused people to become addicted to the dopamine rush of a new relationship that people and that people struggle to handle commitment. So when I say dopamine rush, that is the pleasure hormone. That's the hormone that gives you the sense of pleasure. So let's look at what Paul Joseph Watson has to say and how he argues his case.
Love.
I love you more than I've ever loved any woman.
Everyone wants it.
I guess you could say I just want to have a meaningful relationship with someone special.
But what happens when you get it? You go completely insane because love is a mental illness. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about familial or platonic love. I'm talking about obsessional, romantic love. Nietzsche was right. Love is merely the lust for possession. It's a fundamentally instinctive biological force, which is why it's kind of bizarre how society exalts it as an idealistic moral good. You can argue that love is a biological necessity, but a moral good? I don't think so. And maybe Nietzsche should have realised that before he caught syphilis from a prostitute and went mad.
Not good.
Anyway, people think egoism and greed are the opposite of love. Au contraire, love is about possession and assimilation. What could be more egotistic and greedy than trying to possess another human? Romantic love is essentially a base instinct rooted in the reptilian brain, which is only given a sheen of morality or splendour by modern culture, which hijacked it, commercialised it, and warped it out of all proportion.
What you call love.
Okay, so he's saying a lot of different things here, just so he's talking quite fast. I sort of just want to help you understand what he's sort of making the point is he sort of saying that there is a biological urge that we have for love, this idea of connecting with another person. It's a biological urge. And it is not something that comes from the sort of prefrontal cortex, the thinking part. It is something that comes from the reptilian part, which doesn't involve the real thinking. And because it's a drive that's going on, the way that we kind of navigate it is through, and he says, a sort of thinly veiled sense of morality. The trouble is, though, that sense of morality comes from society. And of late, in probably the last 50 years, the idea of love, he's saying, has been commercialized and has been warped. So the way love is presented by the media is an unhealthy form of love. And that's the point which he is making. So I understand you're probably already disagreeing with them off the bat about what love is, but hear him out. He does talk about how it is supposed to be, but listen to his argument. I find it is effective if you try to not debate him straight away. So hear him out.
Guys like me to sell nylons.
For most of history, romantic love was considered a disease that you had to catch and get over, like chickenpox. Romeo and Juliet wasn't a celebration of love, it was a warning. Same story with Antony and Cleopatra. Dude goes mentally ill from falling in love, then kills himself. Then she kills herself.
Not good.
Tristan and Isolde both end up dead.
Not good.
Apollo and Daphne, their failed romance ended up with her being turned into a tree.
Not good.
Helen of Troy's tryst with Prince Paris of Troy, that ended up in a massive war.
Believe me, not good.
Socrates. No, not that one. The Greek philosopher Socrates said that the male libido is like being chained to a madman. Some people claim that it was the poet Sophocles that said that, but then if it was, that previous quip wouldn't have worked. Anyway, the poet Sophocles said of love, "To my great delight, I have escaped from it, and feel as if I had escaped from a frantic and savage master." What could be more of a burden than being shackled to an irrational beast? What could be more catastrophic to individual identity than the merging of two people?
You complete me.
What could be more enslaving than the complete surrender and devotion to another person at the expense of one's own sanity and free will?
Not good.
Nietzsche said men who are inclined to complete devotion are not men.
Soy boy.
In the case of women, they have to play act the role of being distant Or in other words, simulate a lack of love. Because as soon as a woman becomes too accessible to a man, he loses interest.
When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy.
It's all one huge, tragic comedy. The point is this. Romantic love is corrosive, self-sabotaging, inherently delusional for both sexes, and most of the time it ends in abject misery.
Believe me, not good.
Love is a mental illness. It's at times an episodic, transitory, obsessive-compulsive, and emotionally lethal disorder. I believe so strongly in the destructive power of love that it should be the subject of instruction in schools along with sex and driver's ed. Love infects, contaminates, and destroys your will to resist. It destabilizes and knocks you for a loop. It's a singular, single-serve, client-centered, and individually targeted and focused cult.
Stanton Peele and Archie Brodsky described romantic love as, quote, a sterile, ingrown dependency. I'm just saying, sometimes it's not all it's cracked up to be. So all...
Okay, so again, he's saying an awful lot here, and it is hard to sort of agree with everything, but he is making the point that at the end of the day, love causes somebody to, in a way, go against their own self-interests. That people believe that what they're doing is what is right. But at the end of the day, love causes people to act irrationally. And so he's taking a very rational approach to love, especially when they were saying in schools children should be taught about this. I kind of agree to the extent that people should be made aware on how careful you need to be with this, that it is not something that should be treated lightly, whereas this seems to be a far more extreme approach to this. But again, he's still building up to his final point, which hopefully will tie it all together.
Need to calm your tits.
I lost my faith in womanhood. I lost my faith in womanhood.
Romantic love detracts from the only true source of sustained happiness. Creativity and self-mastery. The perfect fusion of the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Being in love is like being a substance abuser in need of higher and higher doses. Neural scans show that the early stages of romantic love look like a brain experiencing drug addiction.
The same brain region where we found activity becomes active also when you feel the rush of cocaine.
This creates not so much an emotion, but the need to fulfill a craving. The brains of people in love who've been rejected look like junkies going through withdrawal. The areas that light up in their brains are the same ones associated with physical pain. Some sufferers even take the opioid blocker naltrexone to relieve their symptoms. Love also switches off parts of the brain involved in decision-making, causing people to make stupid decisions which harm their own self-interests. Romeo, Juliet, Antony, Cleopatra, all idiots who made stupid decisions because they were mentally ill.
Not good.
Self-sabotage is a byproduct of romantic love. How many times have we seen Romeo and Juliet writ large in society, with people being driven either to kill themselves or others because of this aberrant pathology?
Leave him alone, Miss Elsa. You bad luck to him.
Despite being seen as a positive emotion, romantic love also causes a drop in levels of serotonin, to the point where loved-up people are indistinguishable from those suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is a mental illness. Low serotonin levels cause anxiety, irrationality, and extreme jealousy. Now, it's important to stress that long-term stable love is completely distinct from new romantic love, because it lights up different areas of the brain. I think that we're becoming love junkies, because our brains are being rewired by the internet, and this is why cheating and divorce continues to increase. Since we collectively killed God, humanity has been searching to fill the meaning-shaped hole in its psyche. We try to achieve this partly by engaging in emotional incontinence, by overly emoting and placing too much emphasis on new relationships. Everyone is chasing that initial dopamine rush of new love, and as soon as it fades, we desperately strive to replace it with a fresh source. Remember?
Okay, so this is very much like the cartoon, what we was making, the point that we were making before, that thinking about this a little bit more is this idea that we are constantly trying to go after the next high. because when you get into a new relationship, things are all exciting, they're all wonderful, they're all amazing, and we aren't using our brains, so to speak. And so instead, we continue to go after those emotions by, sitting on the computer, and chatting to new people, and as a result, that causes people to sort of become frustrated with their current relationships. That why isn't this giving me that same sort of feeling that I had before? That instead, now is causing all this frustration that I can't handle it, and instead they then choose to then chase after the next relationship. So let's see how he finishes his argument.
7-year itch. Well, now the average relationship lasts just 2 years and 9 months, and it's shrinking every year. Why? Social media and dating apps. Over a third of people in a 2014 poll said at least part of the reason why their relationship ended was because their partner had met someone else or was flirting with someone else on social media. Over half blamed social media generally for the breakup. The increasing ease with which we can source that new burst of dopamine to meet our junkie addiction for fresh love is decreasing the average length of existing relationships and preventing them from moving on to the later stages of commitment, marriage, and children. When your brain is rewired to be in a state of permanent adolescence, the kid in the candy store constantly looking to try the new treat, that kills your ability to form long-term, meaningful relationships. So in summary, romantic love is a mental illness. It has the same effect as drug addiction. It's a kind of pathology that can lead to self-destruction. And while taking that risk is a biological necessity to foster the urge to procreate, people are refusing to move on to the next stage of stable long-term commitment because social media and dating apps have rewired our brains by creating on-demand supplies of the initial drug, something that we never had before in the evolution of humanity. That's partly why the length of relationships is shrinking. That's partly why fewer people in technocentric societies are getting married or having kids. That's why relationships are in such a mess. That's why we're all screwed, because our brains are being scrambled, infantilized, and set on a constant loop of being stuck in a cycle of mental illness.
Not good.
Okay, so looking at this, he then concludes his point, and I think it's important that I stress this, is that he's saying that to really go into love is that it takes a maturing process. It's not something you can do from as a teenager, because you haven't fully developed. And as you develop self-mastery, that is when you can then move into taking the risk, knowing what the risks are, and then moving into a stable, loving relationship, which does require the commitment. So, and that's what he's sort of saying, is that this technocentric, being that there's a society that's so focused on technology, is causing people, and it's to the point where it's physically rewiring people's ability to process things such as love. Very interesting viewpoint, so I will be very interested to hear what your thoughts are on this. But I want you to take note of this kind of viewpoint. So, explaining the decline in marriage and the popularity of cohabitation. Now, I've already got one example, but whilst the numbers of people getting married has gone down over the years, the number of people cohabitating, meaning people just simply living together, has increased. And so in 2012, 6 million people were cohabitating in the UK, doubling the number from 1996. So more and more people are living together, but they're not getting married. So, knowing this, I want you to go back to page 24, where there are reasons for family diversity, and I want you to look at which reasons for family diversity can also be reasons for the decline of marriage and the rise of cohabitation. I want you to write the reasons down. So you have a table below. I think it's page 47. It might be 48. Yeah, it's 48. I want you to write down the reasons. And you've got secularisation as the first one, which is less religious importance is placed on marriage, meaning couples don't really have to fulfill an expectation. See, sex was considered to be the thing which seals the marriage, and as a result, people shouldn't be living together or engaging in sexual activity until they get married, and sex was the thing, like, it was almost like the thing which signs the legal document. And so couples were more likely to get married for that reason, because obviously when you fall in love, you want to engage in a sexual way, and the only way that you could do that was through marriage. So people, living in sin is less of an issue today because people don't hold to those standards anymore as they used to. Many people still do. I know many of people who have waited until marriage, or people who said that they're not going to engage in any sexual activity because of their viewpoint of particularly the religious viewpoint of sex. So people who still hold a religious viewpoint today will do this, but more so it is commonly accepted that as society is becoming more secular, people are not feeling the need to get married. Now that's one reason. You have got another one. Paul Joseph Watson has made the case of people are more likely they want to experience the idea of moving in with someone and falling in love, and then they will get out and then do it again. So they're not wanting to get married, they just want the excitement. There are a whole bunch of other reasons that were listed on page 24, and I want you to go and chase that. So that is going to require you to go back, do a bit more reading, please. Okay, next slide. So we're going to look at a very interesting case to do with Weatherspoons. So what problem, and this is the question I'm going to get you to think of before I read, what problem relating to the decline in marriage are Weatherspoons offering support with? Here we go. So this is an article coming from 2018, so 2 years ago, coming from the Independent newspaper. It is titled £3,000 Wedding at JD Weatherspoons. It may be known for its cheap pints, garnish carpets, and less than salubrious interiors. So could you ever be tempted to hold your wedding at Weatherspoons? You might when you discover the price. There's a single Weatherspoons outlet in the UK with a marriage license, meaning you can combine Thursday Curry Club with your nuptials if you fancy it. With a room to feed and seat 100 of your closest friends and family members, the all-inclusive Weatherspoons Wedding Special is an offer hard to pass up with its £3,000 price tag. The £3,000 price for a budget Weatherspoons wedding gets newly married brides and grooms exclusive use of the venue until Saturday at 1 a.m. or Sunday until midnight. A 3-course sit-down meal or buffet for all 100 guests, depending on preference, sparkling wine for a toast, and a room for an additional 200 guests after dinner. And that's not all. In addition to covering your food and drinks, newlyweds won't have to spend on a moment worrying about decor and wedding planning, as Weatherspoons has them covered. The venue will provide table decor, a wedding host, a live DJ if the couple wants, and the finest wine Weatherspoons have to offer, Coldwater Creek, all included in the price. The all-inclusive package for 100 guests with dinner and wine is a snip compared to the average spend of £10,745, the price newlyweds pay for ceremony, reception, catering and entertainment, according to Brides magazine. With additional costs like the dress, rings, makeup and honeymoon to consider, the idea of tying the knot in a Weatherspoons sounds quite appealing. Sadly, there's just a single Weatherspoons outlet in the UK with a marriage license, but if your dream of saying I do has always included Weatherspoons, currently the Knights Templar in London is capable of fulfilling all your wedding wishes. Hopefully the beloved pub chain will be expanding the offer soon. So I want you to think about then what is it that Weatherspoons is trying to do here? What is it that they are trying to help with in particularly when we look at people who are wanting to get married? So let's move on. Now, I want you to collate the arguments. That means I want you to bring together everything that we have been talking about today and from our previous discussions. You will focus on answering the following question. Discuss how far sociologists would agree that marriage is no longer important in the UK today. Start to pen out the best for and against arguments. Here are some suggestions to help you. Most people will live in a nuclear family at some point of their life, whether they are born into one, get married, and start one at some point in time. Most people in society will experience this at some point. The nuclear family is presented as the idealized norm by politicians in advertising, by schools, and by religions. Gay and lesbian rights group fought for the right to have equal marriage. And then lastly, in different ethnic groups, marriage has a different meaning. White British families, secularisation is common and marriage has declined. British Asian families are often more religious, whether Sikh, Hindu or Muslim, and have much higher rates of marriage than other communities. Pakistani and Bangladeshi families often practice arranged marriages, different from forced marriages, although this can be a source of conflict as British Asian teens often have similar cultural expectations as all British teenagers. What this is saying is that if you were raised in Britain but come from a background that is from those Asian regions, then your parents who may have not been raised may have the expectation that you will enter an arranged marriage. An arranged marriage is simply your parents coming up with some potential partners for you. It is not something that you are forced into, but instead your parents will go, look, we think you will be best for this person. We are happy to arrange a time when you can meet each other, and if you like each other, we can then move forward with a wedding. So here is your homework. So the task that I have for you is something which you need to do. That is part of the class. This is then the homework I'm going to get you to do after. So I know poor Puggo is not happy about getting homework, but it must be done. I need you to do the reading on Delphi and Leonard on page 52 to 53. These are your feminist sociologists. You need to then answer the multiple choice questions on page 51, given that there's only about 8 questions and they're multiple choice. This should take you no more than 10 minutes. And as for that, I will see you in the next lesson.